Hey everyone, this is Rosie, and today we're going to sew an elf Christmas stocking that can be made in 2 different sizes. So let's get started. If you would like to sew along with me, the pattern is available for purchase, and you can find the link to purchase the pattern in the description below the video. Now, first off, I want to say that there are no written instructions within this pattern, but this video will serve as a step-by-step tutorial for the construction. On the second page of the pattern are some general instructions along with the yardages that you'll need for making the stocking. And on this page here, there's a diagram of how you're going to put your pieces together. So all of the pieces have been divided up in order to fit on the paper, and then you'll follow this diagram here for assembling each piece. And one thing that you really want to take notice of is this test square. When you print out your pattern, you want to make sure that your printer is set to 100% or actual size before printing. And then, once you've printed it out, you're going to measure this test square from side to side and from top to bottom. And it should measure 2 inches in each direction. And you want to measure from the outer edges of the lines here. If the test square measures 2 inches in each direction, then your pattern has printed out the correct size. And you do have all the pieces that you need to make either the small stocking or the large stocking. Here are the pieces for the smaller version of the stocking. So with the cuff piece right here, you want to place this straight edge right here on the fold of the fabric where you see these arrows. And then for the actual stocking piece, you want to cut out one piece of fabric with the pattern face up, and then you want to cut out another piece of fabric with the pattern face down, because these pieces need to be mirrored. And the same for the lining. You're going to cut out one piece of fabric with the pattern face up, and then you'll cut out your second piece with the pattern face down. And that will give you the mirrored pieces that you need to make your stocking. In the video, I will be demonstrating how to make the elf stocking in the larger size. Right here I have 1 yard of woven interfacing. I have a ½ yard of 100% cotton quilting fabric. That will be for my stocking and my lining. I'm just using some general all-purpose thread. And I have a fat quarter of 100% cotton quilting fabric here that I will use for the cuff. And I also have a little bit of fiber fill if I decide that I want to stuff my toe. Here's the ½ yard of fabric that I'm using for the stocking and the lining. So I'm just going to open it up. And the first thing that I like to do is take my pattern piece and I lay it down right here on the fabric. This will be the piece for the lining. What I need to do is fuse the woven interfacing to this piece. So rather than cut out 2 of these and then 2 pieces of the woven interfacing, I just like to cut a piece off from the fabric that's large enough for this pattern piece, and then I'll cut some woven interfacing that's the same size, fuse everything together, and then do my cutting. To demonstrate, I'm just going to lay my ruler down on the fabric, making sure that I have enough fabric for this piece right here. And I'll just cut. And then I can put this piece aside for a minute. And I'll move this out of the way for right now. And then I can go ahead and take my woven interfacing and I'll open it up. And I'm just going to lay my fabric on top of that woven interfacing. Now, the woven interfacing is doubled up right now. So you can see that there. Now, if you don't want to do it this way, you can cut out your pieces individually. Some people may think that this is a little bit wasteful, but I just think it makes sewing the project much easier. I'll just cut off as much as I need. Once you have everything cut to size, you'll just take the woven interfacing and your fabric and you'll put one piece of woven interfacing on the back of each of your fabric pieces. And then you just go over to your iron and fuse this together using the manufacturer's instructions. I have that woven interfacing fused to the back of both of my pieces here. And next, I want to put the fabric right sides together. And then I'm just simply going to take my pattern piece, lay it down on that fabric, and trace all around the edge here. Let's get it lined up the way you want it to be. And then we'll just start tracing. And you'll trace all the way around. And then after you're done tracing, you can go ahead and cut out the stocking. And now I'm just going to cut right on that red line all the way around. Now that I have the stocking cut out, I'm going to leave it just as it is with the right sides together. And I will put clips all the way around to prepare it for sewing. So as I said, I'm using the same fabric for the lining, and you just want to open it up and place right sides together. Then you'll place your pattern piece on top of your fabric, and you want to make note of the fact that there are two sides of the stocking. This side of the stocking needs to face the toe, and this side of the stocking needs to make the heel. So you do need to mark on your fabric here, once you have everything cut out, which side is which. Now all you want to do is trace all the way around here, just like we did for the stocking, and cut everything out. And I am going to do that off camera. My lining is cut out now, and what I want to do is leave it right sides together, and I'm going to put a little pin on the toe side. And it really does matter which way this goes into the stocking because of the shape. So this is following the shape of the stocking, and this is my toe side, this is my heel side. And then I'm just going to, again, place some clips in to hold it together, and that will be ready to sew. Now that the lining is all set to be sewn, we can go ahead and cut out the cuff. So I have my fabric here. You want to fold it with right sides together. You're going to take your pattern piece and place it onto the fabric. And you see these arrows here? These arrows need to be on the fold of the fabric. And then go ahead and trace all the way around. And you need to cut out two of these. Now that I have them both traced out, I can go ahead and cut them. You just cut on the lines that you drew. Do not cut your fold. After you have the two cuffs cut out, just go ahead and clip those edges together. So this is the edge with the fold, and this is the raw edge right here. And that will be ready to sew. The last thing that we need to do is prepare the loop to hang the stocking. So I have my strip of fabric here. It's 6 inches long. If you want to lengthen it or shorten it, that's up to you depending on how long you want your loop to be. You want to take it with wrong sides up and fold it in half so that the wrong sides are together, and then press. So you have this crease here now. Then you want to open it up, and you want to take each long edge and fold it into the crease that we just created. So you'll fold in this way, and then on the opposite side fold that long edge into the crease. So the raw edges should now be facing each other in the middle. And then you're going to press that, and then you'll fold the entire thing in half and give everything a good pressing. Now we are ready to sew all of our pieces together, and all the seam allowances will be 1/4 of an inch. So you're just going to sew all the way around the entire stocking with a 1/4 of an inch seam. And you'll take your lining piece and do the same exact thing. You're just going to sew with a 1/4 of an inch seam all the way around. And for the two cuff pieces, we're just going to sew a seam 1/4 of an inch away from this long edge on both pieces. And for the little strap here, the little loop to hang the stocking, we're just going to do some edge stitching. I'm going to start by sewing the side seam of the cuff together, and I'm using a stitch length of 2.5. and back stitch at both ends. And then you'll just go ahead and sew up the side seam of the other cuff the same exact way. Now I'm going to start sewing the stocking. You do want to back stitch at both ends. I'm using a stitch length of 2.5 and the seam allowance is 1/4 of an inch. Now I am going to speed this up until I get to that curly Q for the toe because I really want to show you how I do that. Okay, now I'm getting towards the curly Q and it's a very sharp curve. So what you want to do is take it slow and just gently guide around the curve as you approach the tip of the toe. And then as you get to the tip and you need to do some pivoting, you're going to raise your presser foot and pivot just enough and take one stitch. Then you're going to pivot again, and each time you pivot you just want to take one stitch. And then once you feel like you don't need to pivot and you can make it around the curve, just go slow, take one stitch at a time. If you get to a point where you need to pivot again, you'll go ahead and do that. But the key here is to go slow. And then once you get past that curly Q, you can finish sewing all the way to the top. And here's the toe. You do get a nice and smooth curve when you take one stitch at a time and pivot after each stitch. Now I'm going to sew the lining, and I'm using a stitch length of 2.0, and my stitch width again is 1/4 of an inch. So you do want to back stitch at both ends. And then just sew on down to the bottom where the curves are. When you get to the curves, you can pivot around it the same way we pivoted around the toe. Then lastly, we're going to sew the loop simply by edge stitching about 1/8 of an inch away from each long edge. And I'm going to use a stitch length of 2.5. And then you can just go ahead and sew down the other side. Here's the stocking all sewn together. So what I like to do is, where that curly Q is on the toe, I like to trim that down to about 1/8 of an inch. Be careful not to cut into your stitching. So about like that. And then I take my scissors, and every place where there's a curve, I like to clip in just a little bit. You certainly don't want to clip in through your stitching there, but make some clips around all of the curves. And then once you've made your clips, you want to go ahead and iron these seams open. I only iron them from one side. I don't iron both sides of the seam open. Now you want to go ahead and press your seams open, but you really only need to press from one side. I like to have a point turner to do this. What I'll do is get my point turner right in between that seam, fold it back, and then you can press it. And this is very helpful when you get to where the curves are, because you can slip this right in between the seam, fold back, and then press. Then for the lining piece, just fold back the seams on the sides. You don't really have to do anything on the bottom. You don't have to clip the curves on the bottom because this is just going to be sitting at the bottom of the stocking. Then what you want to do for the cuff is just to open those side seams and iron them down flat. And we'll be doing some more sewing with these pieces in a little bit. Now I have all the seams pressed open and we're ready to start turning the stocking inside out. So just go ahead and grab and start pulling. Get your hand down in there as far as you can get it to go. And then you're going to start pulling out the toe. So just reach in and just keep reaching in and pulling on that toe until you get the curlicue all the way to the outside. It's a little bit of a challenge, but not terrible. Just got to keep reaching in and pulling. And then once you have it almost all the way out there, you can go in there with your point turner and reach up into the tip of that toe and gently push. Now you want to be gentle because you don't want to go through your seam there. Then once you have the toe all taken care of, what you want to do is roll your seams so that that seam line is right on the top there. So just roll it between your fingers and get it to where the seam is sitting right on the top. And you'll do that all the way around, and then you're going to go ahead and press everything really well. I have the stocking pressed, and now if you want to put in some fiber fill, you're just going to take little pieces at a time, and you want to get it right up into this toe area. Now the fiber fill is optional, but it does give a little bit of weight to that toe so that it doesn't flop when you hang it up. I prefer actually not to have it in, but it does give some nice shape to the stocking and gives it, you know, a little bit of that 3D look. So I have a little bit more here, and you don't want to fill past like this area right here. And I don't like to put in a lot. When I do put it in, I just like to have a little bit, just to give it a little bit of shape and dimension. So if you want, you can go ahead and put in that fiber fill, or you can just go ahead to the next step, which is to put in the lining. Here's what the toe looks like with a little bit of the fiber fill in there. I don't put in a lot, as I said. It just gives it a little bit of shape and dimension. So next we'll take the lining, and remember we put a pin in on the toe side, so we want this seam here to be facing the toe. So I'll take out the pin now, and I'll just put my hand inside the lining, and I'm going to stuff it down into the stocking. And once I get it down there, I'm going to take some Wonder Clips and clip the lining in place. Now you want to match up your seams, so match up your side seams, and then just clip all the way around the top. And if you notice, I did not turn that lining right side out. So you just want to leave it exactly the way you sewed it. You're not turning the lining right side out. So just clip along the top, and then we're going to put this aside and work on the cuff. Now we're going to work on the cuff, so you want to take one of them and turn it right side out, just like this. And they're going to take this one, place it inside the other one, so that now the right sides are facing each other. And you'll go ahead and match up that side seam. And just put a few clips in along the top here just to hold it together. We're not actually going to sew this now, but we just want to hold it together as we sew our points. And then once you have this top secured, you want to line up all of your points. And I like to just put a clip on one side. Make sure everything is nicely lined up there. So line up each one, and then we're going to go over to the sewing machine and sew our points. Now when you sew them, we're going to have it down on the bed just like this of the sewing machine, and we're going to sew up and down each point with a 1/4 of an inch seam. I'll start sewing my points with a stitch length of 2.0 and a seam width of 1/4 of an inch. So you don't need to back stitch because we'll be coming back around to this point at the end. So you just want to go down and stop about 1/4 of an inch before this edge right here, and then you're going to pivot and you'll sew up the other side. Now I didn't go far enough, so I'll take one more stitch. Now I'll pivot and take this clip out, and I'm going to sew up this side of the point, and I want to stop when I get to about right here, right in the middle of the intersection of these 2 points. I'll pivot, and I will take one more stitch. Just make sure nothing's getting caught under the area where you're sewing. And I'll pivot and sew up the other side. And then you're just going to keep sewing up and down all of the points until you get back to where you started. Now I'm almost back to my starting point right here, so I'm going to sew up this other side on the adjacent point. And then I'm just going to go ahead and sew over this original line of stitching right here. I know it's probably a little bit hard for you to see, but this is my first line of stitching. So just sew over it a few stitches and then you can give it a back stitch. After you sew your points, you want to go ahead and trim off the tips. So you go close to your stitching, but obviously not through it. You just want to be careful not to cut through your stitches. And then what I like to do is clip up in this area right here. So again, try and clip up towards your stitching, but not through your stitching. And then after you've got all the clipping done, you'll go over to your iron and you want to open up these seams. You only have to iron on one side and then just iron your seam down. After you have all of your seams ironed open, you're just going to turn this right side out. And you want to poke out all of your points. And then you can go in with a point turner and very gently push out the tips of those points. And once you have the tips pushed out nicely, go ahead and iron down your points. So I'm going to go work on mine and iron them, and when I come back we can finish putting the stocking together. After you have the cuff done, we can assemble the stocking. So you want to start by taking the loop that you made, and this is the loop that you're going to hang the stocking with, fold it in half so these raw edges here are together at the end. And you want to clip that inside of the stocking. And we're going to clip it right on that seam line there, on the side of the stocking. And it's the seam that's on the same side as the heel. Then you'll take the cuff, and you're going to find the seam there, and you want to take the cuff and put it inside the stocking. And you're going to line up that seam with the seam that's on the same side as the heel. So just where you put the loop, and you'll clip that together. And then you're just going to clip this in place all the way around. And once it's clipped, we can sew everything together, all the layers together, with a 1/4 of an inch seam. Now you already have the lining in there. We've clipped that in before, so the lining is in, your loop should be in, and the cuff should be all set into place. Now I'm going to sew all of the layers together, and I am sewing from the inside of the stocking. So stitch length is 2.5. And just maneuver everything around. So you keep maneuvering, repositioning as you need to. And when you get back to where you started, just stitch over that original stitching there, just a little bit. I have the cuff sewn into place. And as far as this seam right here goes, you can finish it off a couple of different ways. You can do a zigzag stitch, you can serge it, or you can use some seam binding. And I prefer to use seam binding because that gives me a nice finished edge there. And once you have your finished seam here, however you choose to do it, you can go ahead and pull out the cuff, fold it back over the stocking. Here's the loop right here. You can pull that out. And then I just like to go around the top, kind of roll that seam out again to where the seam is sitting right at the top there. And then I just go ahead and give it a little bit of a pressing. So here is the stocking all finished. And this one, as you know, has the fiberfill in it. And then I have the smaller version of the stocking right here, which also has the fiberfill in it. And you can compare the sizes here. I also have another large one that does not have any fiberfill in it, so you can compare and see the difference. Well, I do hope that you've enjoyed watching the video, and I hope that you'll give the stocking a try. And I'd like to thank all of you who have supported me by subscribing to my channel and liking my videos. And if you're not already a subscriber, I would love to have you as one, so please like and subscribe.